Disclaimer, this channel's host has a speech impairment. She may be a little hard to understand at first, but if you stick around, you'll get used to it. And you might learn a thing or two while you're at it. Also, this channel is going to have a lot of true crime content. Viewer discretion is advised. Now on with the show.
On November 19, 2008, Brian Sinclair entered a hospital in Winnipeg seeking help for a routine medical problem. He arrived in a wheelchair in the emergency room waiting area and waited. He would never leave alive. For more than 30 hours, Brian Sinclair remained in that waiting room, surrounded by doctors, nurses, and other patients, without being seen, examined, or triaged. When someone finally noticed him, he had already been dead for hours. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. Today I'm going to be telling you the case of Brian Sinclair, a disabled man who went to the ER and never left. This case hits home for many reasons, but I'll save those until the end. For now, let's jump into the case. Chapter 1. Who Brian Sinclair was. Brian Sinclair was 45 years old. He was an Indigenous man from Manitoba and a double amputee who used a wheelchair. He lived independently and was capable of managing his own care. Not homeless, intoxicated, or unable to advocate for himself. Assumptions that would later shape how other people saw him. Very little is publicly known about Brian Sinclair's personal life. There are few photographs, few stories, and few recorded memories. For many marginalized people, especially disabled Indigenous men, the public record begins only after something goes wrong. What is known is that Sinclair relied on a urinary catheter. On the day he went to the hospital, it had become blocked. A common and treatable medical issue that, if left untreated, can lead to infection. Chapter 2. The day at the hospital. On the afternoon of November 19th, Sinclair arrived at Winnipeg's Health Services Center by accessible van and entered the emergency department. Hospital protocol required that every patient be triaged, assessed, logged, and prioritized for care. That did not happen. Sinclair sat quietly in the waiting room as hours passed. Staff members came and went. Shifts changed. Patients were called to treatment room and discharged. Yet Sinclair remained where he was. Multiple hospital employees saw him. Some assumed he had already been assessed. Others believed he was intoxicated or simply waiting for a ride. No one checked. No one asked his name. No one confirmed whether he was a patient at all. There was no chart to consult. He had never been entered into the system. Other patients noticed him too. Some later recalled that he did not move for long periods of time. No one thought to ask. Sinclair did not cry out. He did not collapse. He did not match the visual cues of an emergency. Chapter 3: The Discovery. On November 20th, more than a full day after his arrival, Brian Sinclair was found slumped forward in his wheelchair. Sepsis caused by a bladder infection, a direct result of untreated catheter blockage. Medical experts later confirmed that with timely care, his death was almost entirely preventable. Chapter 4: Bias and Ableism. Brian Sinclair did not die because his condition was rare or misunderstood. He died because he was not seen as a patient. Ableism played a critical role. His wheelchair marked him as stationary, passive, and non-urgent. His quiet presence allowed others to make assumptions instead of assessments. Racial bias also cannot be ignored. Indigenous patients in Canada have long reported being dismissed in healthcare settings. Several staff members later admitted they assumed Sinclair was intoxicated, not because of evaluation, but because of stereotypes. Emergency rooms often prioritize those who are loud, visibly distressed, or disruptive. Those who are quiet, still, or disabled can disappear into the background. In this system, silence is mistaken for stability. Chapter 5: The Inquest. A formal inquest to Brian Sinclair's death was held in 2014. 6 years later, it concluded that his death was preventable and that multiple failures within the hospital system. No individual was held responsible. Instead, the inquest focused on communication breakdowns, unclear protocols, and systemic oversight. Its language is clinical, describing, quote, process failures, unquote, rather than neglect. Responsibility was spread so broadly that it effectively vanished. Chapter 6: No Charges. Despite the findings, no criminal charges were filed. Criminal negligence requires identifying a specific individual who showed reckless disregard for life. In Sinclair's case, responsibility was shared across shifts, departments, and assumptions. In other settings, similar neglect has led to prosecutions. In medical environments, complexity often becomes a shield against accountability. It is difficult to ignore that Brian Sinclair's identity influenced the outcome. A white, non-disabled patient left unattended for 34 hours might have prompted a different response. We just don't know, but we must ask the question. Chapter 7. Public Memory. Brian Sinclair's death briefly made headlines. This made it. There was no courtroom drama, no single billing, no moment that fit neatly into a true crime narrative. Institutional neglect is a harder story to tell. It offers no spectacle, only discomfort. And so Brian Sinclair was forgotten. Chapter 8. Why it Still Matters. Brian Sinclair's death was not an isolated incident. Indigenous patients continue to report mistreatment. Disabled people continue to struggle to be seen as credible patients. Hospitals are meant to be places of care. When some people die there, in public, surrounded by professionals, it forces a reckoning. Brian Sinclair did not die because help was unavailable. He died because it was withheld. His story reminds us that some devastating harms do not involve violence or intent. Chapter 9. Context. This is not a traditional true crime story. There was no weapon, no dramatic confrontation, no single person charged with causing Brian Sinclair's death. But it is a story about neglect, bias, and systems that failed in plain sight. And it raises difficult questions. When a person dies because no one intervenes, who is responsible? Chapter 10. Personal Reflections. You know, when I was reading the case, I kept asking myself, well, why didn't he do anything? And beyond the truth is, I don't know. You have some personal experiences in situations like these. And I know for me personally, if I'm alone, it can be very hard for me to ask for help. Because a lot of times people assume I am mentally disabled and they don't listen to me. And I know I have a speech impairment. I know Brian Sinclair did not. When you're disabled, people treat you differently. I know for myself, I have kind of learned to be withdrawn in certain situations. I know I have sat, I should have, because I was scared to ask for help. I was scared of the bias I might encounter. I don't know if this was the case in Brian Sinclair's case, but I can only speculate. I do use ChatGPT to write my scripts. I really would like to not use it. But if you notice, I'm kind of slow at making content. And I'm a slow writer too. So I have help somewhere. I chose to have help writing my scripts. You can't be mad at me for doing it. I'm kind of mad at myself. You never know. I might get really big and be able to hire a writer someday. Yeah, like that would happen. Anyway, I just want to say sometimes ChatGPT gives a lot of nuance. Sometimes it focuses on one aspect of the case. I try to write my prompt so that doesn't happen, but it unfortunately does because that's how the online world is. So if you're a returning viewer of my channel, first let me say thank you so much. There's not a lot of you out there. But if you are, and if my story lacks nuance in any of my videos, why? Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting and informative. If you like this content, you know what to do. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.